Hi, and welcome back to this Tuesday edition of Focal Point on AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. Great to have you in the conversation with us. I want to start, if we can, Rob, by grabbing soundbite. It's down in the list. Where is that puppy? Clip 21, the Howard Dean clip. I want to start with that. And then I'm going to want to come back to clip number 5, the Phil Robertson Duck Dynasty clip. Rand Paul is, he will label himself as a libertarian. It's kind of a conservative, as a Republican libertarian, kind of a conservative libertarian. Now, I believe a biblical point of view is to be a libertarian on economic issues, but to be a conservative on social issues. And that's where the real dividing line comes. If we're libertarian on economic issues, which I believe the Bible to be, and which is my personal position, then we want the government to get as out of the way as possible when it comes to economic issues. The government shouldn't be involved in that whatsoever in terms of regulating, in terms of increasing the burden on businesses, in terms of interfering with the negotiations between employers and employee for the compensation and for the wage. Government ought to just be out of that altogether. That is a libertarian mindset. Regulation ought to be at an absolute minimum. We should allow the market, which is really, when people talk about trusting the market, really all we're talking about is trusting the American people. When you hear people talking about who's the market? Well, the market is us. The market is the American people making choices about what they are going to do with the money in their wallet. And we trust the American people to make decisions that they believe are in their own best interest and in the best interest of their family. Who knows better than they do about what choices are best and right for them? Government doesn't know that. Thomas Sowell has often made this argument that there is nobody alive that has enough information to make all of these decisions that impact the economy. And to know what people want, to know what people need, to know what's going to work. Nobody is smart enough to have all that information. It isn't simply not possible. So that means anytime you have government trying to make these decisions, trying to generate the economy, trying to manage the economy, trying to stimulate the economy, by definition, they have no idea what they're doing. You have 315 million people in America, and all of them are going to have purchasing priorities that are different than their neighbors. Now, the only way that you could have a controlled economy directed from some central bureaucratic cubicle in Washington, D.C., is for somebody sitting in that cubicle to know at every moment of every hour of every day exactly what the purchasing priorities of those 315 million people are. Now, nobody knows that. Nobody has access to that information. So that means if they try to direct economic traffic in any way, they are going to cut across the preferences and the values and the purchasing decisions of who knows how many untold millions of American people, and actually frustrate them in their desire to be able to make purchasing decisions with their own money. So that's why I believe we ought to be libertarian. In fact, I would suggest to you that the function of government when it comes to the economy is one thing, and it is one thing only. This is the sole role of government when it comes to the economy, and that is to enforce contracts. That's a proper role of government. Somebody enters into a contractual agreement with somebody else, a business transaction, a commercial transaction, and then they try to walk away from it. They try to break their end of the deal. They've entered into a contract. They've signed it. They've given a solemn obligation that they will do X, Y, and Z. If they decide to do A, B, and C instead, then it's appropriate for government to step in and say, no, we're going to enforce this contract. You have to keep the terms of the contract that you signed. And that's all we need. That's the entire, complete, sum total role of government when it comes to the economy, to enforce contracts, because that's what you want. Otherwise, you're going to get Guido out there with a tire iron breaking people's legs if somebody reneges on a contract. We don't want that. That's anarchy. That's vigilante justice. So somebody is in a business relationship with somebody else, and that person B breaks a legally binding contract with them, then person A needs to have a place to go. They go to the government, they go to the state. God has given power and authority to the state to intervene in a situation like that and to secure justice. So that makes us libertarians from an economic standpoint, but conservatives from a social standpoint. And this is where we part company with classic libertarians, because classic libertarians, it's not liberty. They call themselves libertarian as if liberty was at the root of what they do. It's license. It is moral anarchy. It's a moral free-for-all. It's an absence of any kind of restraint, an absence of any kind of control on human appetites. That is not a mature approach to life. Life descends into chaos when everybody does whatever they want. You know, we see from the book of Judges, every man did what was right in his own eyes. It was a ticket to bondage. That's libertarianism. I mean, libertarianism is as old as the book of Judges. It's been around since the days of Joshua. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. And what happened? It was total chaos. It was anarchy. It was bondage, this miserable cycle of bondage, crying out to God for help, being delivered, and sinking right back into bondage and captivity. So we believe in social conservatism because we believe that moral values and having a transcendent moral code like the Ten Commandments, it's very simple, just 10 rules there. Actually 9 that are still abiding today because the command regarding the Sabbath was not renewed under the New Covenant, under the New Testament. And this is what gives us unity as a people. People wonder, well, what gives us unity as a people? Well, number one, it's belief in God as a creator. That's the first thing that unifies us. A belief in the God who is revealed in the pages of the Bible. That's the God that the founders believed in. When they refer to the Creator in the Declaration of Independence, that's who they were talking about, the Creator that is revealed in the very first words in the Bible. In the beginning, God did what? He created the heavens and the earth. Later in Genesis chapter 1, male and female, he created them. That's where the founders got the concept in the Declaration of Independence that man is a created being and that our fundamental rights are bestowed on us by him. So that's a tremendously unifying factor, that there is a God. That's a culturally unifying factor. It is a factor that unifies us as a people and as a nation, and something that we ought to keep in the centerpiece of our common life as a people. Then the second thing is to have an abiding moral standard to which everybody agrees. Everybody agrees and everybody accepts that these are the rules for life, that everybody ought to at least aspire to live up to these rules, and that we ought to hold people accountable who do not live up to these rules. Honor your father and mother. Be faithful to your wife. Do not commit adultery. Don't steal. Don't take something that doesn't belong to you. Do not commit murder. Don't tell a lie on the witness stand. These are not complicated rules. Do not covet what belongs to your neighbor. These are not complicated rules. But part of what gives us a unity as a people is we all agree, yes, those are the abiding transcendent rules that we're all accountable to. All of us, no matter what our racial background is, no matter what our economic background is, no matter what our cultural background is, no matter what our class background is, no matter what our racial background is, all of us agree, regardless of all of those factors, that this is the thing that unifies us. We believe that we as a people should live up to these standards. Now, Howard Dean is talking about Rand Paul, who many people call a libertarian, clip 21, and Howard Dean says, no, Rand Paul cannot be a libertarian, and here's why.
It's fascinating to watch this. First of all, lesson number one is for Rand Paul, who is, by the way, not a libertarian. If you believe you ought to be able to tell women what to do with their reproductive rights, you are not a libertarian. Lesson number one for Rand Paul is do not take on a guy from Jersey. Obviously, this guy does not watch HBO. And you're not going to win a fight like this with Chris Christie. That's just not the way it's going to happen.
So Howard Dean says, look, Rand Paul can call himself a libertarian all he wants, but he's not, because he believes in the sanctity of human life. So he's not a libertarian. He is a social conservative because he believes in the sanctity of human life. Now, you're familiar with the program Duck Dynasty. I have watched I bet I've watched 20 minutes of Duck Dynasty in my entire life, and I agree it is hilarious. Those guys are an absolute stitch. Now, here is Phil Robertson from Duck Dynasty, and he's a preacher. You know, and one of the things they said when they were contacted, I don't know what network, cable network that thing airs on, But they were saying, look, we got to keep God in the center of this thing, or we're not going to do it. If we don't get to close every show in prayer, we're not interested. We're not going to do it. They said, fine. It's the number one nonfiction rated cable show of all time, of all history, which tells you something about where the American people are at. They're not as off in the weeds as everybody thinks. Here's a family. There are happy marriages. There are happy kids. There's a strong element of faith. They pray at meals. They enjoy each other. They are engaged in activities perfectly harmless and all that kind of thing. And the American people love it. It's the highest rated cable show in all of cable history. So here is Phil Robertson behind the pulpit, and he's bringing it. Speaking of the issue of sanctity of life, nobody's going to accuse Phil Robertson of being a libertarian on the sanctity of life. Let's listen.
We've been endowed by our Creator, according to Thomas Jefferson, with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life. I tell you, it didn't take us 150 years. We start ripping babies out of wombs. They should have listened to Thomas Jefferson. You have a God-given right to live inside your mother. Come on. To debate whether it's right or wrong to rip you out of your mother's womb when you're about that long. Listen, from the time you started inside your mother's womb, Thomas Jefferson had it right. You have a God-given right to live, for crying out loud. You're this long. You're a week old inside your mother. They sucked you out of there when you're about like that. You wouldn't be here tonight. And when you got about the size of my thumb, they sucked you out. You wouldn't be here. Then you grew a little bigger, like my fist. And finally, 8, 9 months later, you come out. And we debate whether it's some woman has the right to tear you out of there a piece at a time? Come on! You have a God-given right to live, and of all places inside your mother. What in the world happened to us?
Now the audio is not great on that clip. It's kind of home audio, internet audio, but he's very clearly citing the words of Thomas Jefferson. We have a right to life. You have a right to life. The safest place in the world for a baby ought to be in her mother's womb, and yet we are tolerating the practice of ripping babies apart in their mother's womb. What has happened to us? Focal Point, AFR Talk.